You already know why Toys R Us died. Amazon killed it. The internet came. The big box giant couldn't keep up. And the toy store of your childhood went out of business. That's the story everyone tells. And it is wrong. Because Toys R Us didn't die in 2018. The knife went in 13 years earlier. In a boardroom, in a deal most people never even heard about. And Amazon didn't hold it. Here's the part that should make you angry. In the years right before it collapsed, Toys R Us was still one of the most recognized brands on the planet, still selling billions of dollars of toys a year. On paper, its core business was still making money. A company like that does not simply lose to a website. It has to be bled. And that is exactly what happened. This is the file on Toys R Us. But to understand the betrayal, you have to understand what was betrayed. It began in 1948 with a man named Charles Lazarus in a single baby furniture shop in Washington. Parents kept asking him for toys, so he gave them toys. And then he built something no one had ever seen. A store the size of a warehouse, stacked floor to ceiling with nothing but them. He called it Toys R Us, put a cartoon giraffe named Jeffrey over the door, and to a child, walking through it felt like walking into heaven. Aisle after aisle, brighter than Christmas morning, and it worked so well it became a weapon. Toys R Us grew so big and bought in such volume that it could undercut every toy store in America. And one by one, it drove them out of business. They called it a category killer. By its peak, Toys R Us controlled around a quarter of every toy sold in the United States. It was so dominant that toy makers feared it, parents depended on it, and competitors simply vanished. If you were a kid in the 80s or 90s, this wasn't a store, it was the store. So how does something that powerful end up as an empty building? The first crack came in the year 2000. The internet was rising, and instead of building its own online store, Toys R Us made a fateful deal. It agreed to become the exclusive toy seller on a young website called Amazon. It handed its digital future to someone else. The partnership collapsed in lawsuits a few years later, but the damage was done. Toys R Us had wasted the exact years it needed to learn how to sell online. But that mistake alone would not have been fatal. Plenty of companies stumble online and recover. Toys R Us never got the chance because in 2005, 3 of the most powerful firms on Wall Street walked through the door. And what they did next is the real reason the lights went out. Their names were KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado. In 2005, they bought Toys R Us and took it private for $6.6 billion. On the surface, that sounds like an investment, a rescue even. But look closer at how they paid for it, and you see the trap. Because they did not really pay with their own money. Of that $6.6 billion, the 3 firms put in only about $1.3 billion of their own cash. The rest, more than $5 billion, was borrowed. And here is the sleight of hand at the heart of the whole story. That debt was not put on the firms who borrowed it. It was loaded onto Toys R Us itself. Overnight, a healthy company was made to owe $5 billion it never chose to borrow. This is a maneuver called a leveraged buyout, and its arithmetic is brutal. From that day forward, Toys R Us had to pay around $400 million every single year, just in interest on that debt. $400 million gone before it could spend a cent on new stores, on lower prices, on the website it desperately needed to fight Amazon. Think about what that means. Financial analysts and reporters later pointed out that without those debt payments, Toys R Us would have been running a real operating profit. The toy business worked, the stores worked, the customers still came. The only thing killing it was the mountain of debt strapped to its back by the people who supposedly owned it. It was a healthy patient, forced to bleed a little more every year. And while the company gasped, the owners were paid. Reports show the firms arranged to collect around $15 million a year in advisory fees, plus tens of millions more in charges tied to the deal. So follow the logic. The company was drowning in debt those firms had arranged, and those same firms were charging it fees for the privilege. Heads, they win. Now put it together. For over a decade, while Amazon and Walmart poured money into low prices and fast delivery, Toys R Us couldn't. Every spare dollar went to the lenders. Its stores grew tired and dated. Its website stayed weak. It walked into the biggest fight in retail history with its hands tied behind its back. And then everyone blamed it for losing. By 2017, the interest had done its work. That September, buried under roughly $5 billion of debt, Toys R Us filed for bankruptcy protection. Management still hoped to reorganize, to save the brand, keep the stores, keep the people. They pinned everything on one last Christmas. It wasn't enough. The debt was simply too deep to climb out of. In March of 2018, the announcement came. Toys R Us would close or sell every single one of its roughly 800 stores in the United States. Jeffrey the Giraffe, the face of childhood for 70 years, was being put down. And across the country, one by one, the rainbow signs went dark. But the cruelest part wasn't the stores, it was the people. More than 30,000 American workers, cashiers, stockers, managers, some of whom had given the company 20 and 30 years of their lives, were let go. And they were told there would be no severance, not a dime. The company said the money simply wasn't there. Sit with that. The firms had put in $1.3 billion and borrowed $5 billion more against the workers' own company. The deal had generated fees for years, and when it all fell apart, the message to the people who had actually run the stores was, there is nothing left for you. So they refused to accept it. The workers organized. They traveled to Washington. They confronted lawmakers and cornered the investors in public, demanding what they said they were owed, around $75 million. And under that pressure, the story finally cracked open. Two of the firms, KKR and Bain, agreed to set up a hardship fund for the employees, a total of $20 million. $20 million split among tens of thousands of people. For workers, the checks range from a couple $100s to a few thousand, for decades of service. And here is the final, bitter accounting. The firms themselves also lost. Their $1.3 billion investment was wiped out in the collapse. Nobody walked away a hero, but only one group of people got to walk away rich along the way. And it was never the ones behind the registers. And there is one last detail I can't shake. That same month the death was announced, the man who started it all, Charles Lazarus, the founder, died. He was 94. He had built a kingdom for children out of a single furniture shop, watched it conquer America, and then, in his final week of life, watched Wall Street finish it off. The founder outlived his company by just 7 days. So no, Amazon did not kill Toys R Us. Amazon was simply the fight Toys R Us was never allowed to have. The real cause of death was a deal, a legal, ordinary Wall Street deal that turned a thriving company into a carcass to be loaded with debt, drained of cash, and left to collapse, while the people who arranged it collected their fees on the way down. So let me ask you, and be honest, when a company is bought, buried in debt it never chose, and bled until it dies, and 30,000 workers are told there's nothing left for them, is that just business? Or is it something we should never have made legal in the first place? Tell me in the comments. Because Toys R Us was not the first company this happened to, and it will not be the last. Charles Lazarus built a place where being a kid felt like magic. It took him a lifetime. It took a spreadsheet 13 years to erase it. That is the file on Toys R Us. Every empire leaves a file, and the ones taken apart for profit leave the coldest wreckage of all. This was fail number 10. If you want to see which empire we open next, subscribe, because the brighter it shines, the darker the story underneath. Every empire leaves a file.